Mr. Trump and his wife to feel welcome and would do everything possible to help them succeed. Mr. Trump said they had discussed many situations, some wonderful and some difficult. Our North America editor John Sopel reports.
From January, it will be Air Force One. But Donald Trump flew into Washington on his own signature plane ahead of another extraordinary day in the political story of the United States. A full motorcade sweeping him to his first meeting at the White House. And then the jaw-dropping, pinch-yourself, rub-your-eyes moment. Donald Trump sitting down in the Oval Office with the current president. Two men who in the past have made zero attempt to hide their utter contempt for one another, today apparently partners, working on a smooth transition of power.
I very much look forward to dealing with the president in the future, including counsel. He explained some of the difficulties, some of the high-flying assets, and some of the really great things that have been achieved. So, Mr. President, it was a great honor being with you, and I look forward to being with you many, many more times in the future. Thank you, sir.
This meeting is about showing the strength and robustness of the US Constitution, that the office of the presidency is more important than any individual, that the peaceful transfer of power is a cornerstone of US democracy. Who knows what will be said when the cameras aren't there? But let's hope it's more constructive than some of the things they've said about each other.
Donald Trump is uniquely unqualified to be president.
The rise of ISIS is the direct result of policy decisions made by President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton.
Whenever things are going badly for you and you lose, you start blaming somebody else, then you don't have what it takes to be in this job.
I call President Obama and Hillary Clinton the founders of ISIS. They're the founders.
And then suddenly he's going to be the champion of working people? Come on. Come on, man.
But there are serious policy issues where Donald Trump is determined to undo what his predecessor put in place. The Affordable Care Act, the signature policy achievement of the Barack Obama years, known as Obamacare, gave health insurance to millions more Americans. But it's hated by huge numbers because premiums have soared and cover worsened. Donald Trump has pledged to repeal and replace it, though with what is unknown. Enormous amounts of time and effort have been spent on comprehensive trade deals with Asia and Europe. Both of those will be dead in the water under a Trump presidency. Obama also invested a lot of political capital in the climate change deal signed in Paris by world leaders, and which only came into force a few days ago. But Donald Trump has previously said climate change is a hoax and promised to withdraw US support.
We reject the president-elect! We reject the president-elect!
And look beyond the ceremony in Washington and the picture is different. Here another cornerstone of American democracy was on show, the right to protest.
I can't understand how someone who is so misogynistic could be elected to be president of the United States. And it's been a horrible day, it was a horrible night, it's just been a horrible past few months, and we want Trump out.
Deport Trump! Deport Trump!
They have a right to protest, but let's look at what they're protesting. They're protesting democracy. Democracy was at work. Democracy is what played out.
Thousands marched in fury at the dawning of the Trump era. In an election campaign that divided the nation, for many there is still deep unease, anger and trepidation. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
Well, in the last hour, White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest has been giving his reaction to that meeting and was asked whether the meeting between the president and the president-elect was awkward, given all that they've said about each other in the past.
This administration, at the direction of President Obama, has been preparing for this moment and this meeting for the better part of a year. And this obviously was an important early step, having the president sit down with the president-elect to discuss that transition. And based on the kind of agreement that was evident about the priority that they both place on a smooth transition, it sounds like the meeting might have been at least a little less awkward than some might have expected.
Well, Paul Wood is outside the White House and he joins me now. Paul, less awkward than expected. What were they expecting from this meeting?
Well, I don't know how much you can tell from body language, but as you say, and as Josh Earnest said, less awkward. They seemed extraordinarily relaxed for two men who only a few days ago had been saying really the most vile things about each other. Mr. Obama saying that Donald Trump was not fit to have the nuclear codes. Donald Trump saying Mr. Obama was part of the corrupt Washington swamp. And the meeting, supposed to be 10 or 15 minutes, according to Donald Trump, went on for an hour and a half. That is not just a courtesy meeting. It is not a meeting for the sake of protocol. It's a meeting in which they were discussing things. Now, what were they discussing? President Obama said policy, foreign, domestic. Doesn't tell you very much. There was a sort of a mood yesterday in the White House, as expressed again by Josh Earnest, that they wanted to convey, people here wanted to convey to Mr. Trump that perhaps policies might look a little more complicated and issues might look a little more involved once Donald Trump was sitting at the desk in the Oval Office. And they essentially hope that Mr. Trump will not govern as he has campaigned. And on things like the Iran nuclear deal, they are quite alarmed about the prospect of that just being scrapped. And perhaps, and this is just speculation, but given what we heard from Josh Earnest the day before, perhaps President Obama raised issues like this, hoping perhaps to move Donald Trump a little bit. But Donald Trump's the man who won the election. Mr. Obama's out of here in a couple of months.
So on that basis, just how important is this relationship between the two men at this stage?
Well, there's 2 months of a transition to go, and given that it takes about 2 months, for instance, to vet people by the FBI and other agencies, I would expect that Mr. Trump's already handed over, or already finalising his list of cabinet and sub-cabinet appointments. President Obama talked about the transition 8 years ago, and he said that was a very good transition handled by President Bush. He wants to carry on in the same spirit. But then there was a kind of a period of silence from Mr. Bush, recognising there was a new president, giving President Obama some freedom of manoeuvre. The implication in hearing those things again from White House officials is that it'll be pretty much the game plan this time. And that's going to be very difficult for President Obama, make no mistake about it. If you have the image in your mind of a man with a very large sledgehammer about to take a swing at a very fragile china vase, that man is President-elect, President as he will be, Trump, armed with his mandate. The sledgehammer is his control, Republican control of Congress, and the vase is President Obama's legacy.
A lot of smashing up by the sounds of it. Well, Paul Wood outside the White House, thank you very much indeed for joining me. So, with 2 months before Donald Trump is inaugurated as 45th President of the United States, there's a lot of focus on what he's likely to do first. His campaign promises included building a wall on the US border with Mexico, a temporary ban on Muslims coming into the US, and a pledge to create millions of jobs. Well, our chief correspondent Gavin Hewitt takes a closer look at Mr. Trump's agenda.
The nation's capital and the chambers of power. Donald Trump has the potential to be a powerful president, with both houses of Congress controlled by the Republican Party. At his victory party the other night, he gave a big clue.
We are going to fix our inner cities and rebuild our highways, bridges, tunnels, airports, schools, hospitals. We're going to rebuild our infrastructure.
Rebuilding America's crumbling infrastructure will enable him to make an immediate impact and to leave his mark. He has also promised less regulation, lower taxes. But his other big promise is to reduce immigration by building a wall along the Mexican border. But that will be a difficult ambition to achieve.
I think we have to take our bearings from his activist character, the fact that he's used to being in charge of things. He does not mind acting alone. As a matter of fact, he rather prides himself on his capacity to act alone.
Another seat of power is the Supreme Court, and Donald Trump has opportunities there.
Nothing matters more to conservative Republicans than who sits here on the Supreme Court. Donald Trump will be able to appoint at least one judge, perhaps more, and they make key constitutional rulings in areas such as abortion and gun rights.
And then there's international affairs. Here at the State Department, they're asking this question: will a Trump administration challenge international agreements that have been the bedrock of foreign policy? Will President-elect Trump honor NATO's core commitment to defend allies? And perhaps, most importantly, what will be his relationship with President Putin of Russia? As regards Donald Trump's likely team, he's sure to reward those who stood with him during the campaign. Men like Rudy Giuliani, former mayor of New York, Governor Chris Christie, and former Speaker Newt Gingrich. But it's not yet certain who will get the most senior posts. Perhaps the biggest question is whether Donald Trump will deliver the promises made on the campaign trail designed to fire up crowds, or will he be more pragmatic, as he indicated in 1999?
You have the Democrats that are too far left. You have the Republicans that are too far right. And I think I'm somewhere right down the middle. And I just think it's something that we need. We need spirit in this country.
They're already building the stage for Donald Trump's inauguration. As a candidate, he has made many promises. Some won't be carried out, but he's ambitious, determined to leave a big legacy, and rebuilding America's infrastructure will be an early priority. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Washington.
Well, with me is Ron Bonjean, who's a Republican strategist. Ron, there's a very big agenda to tackle, but I would imagine Mr. Trump's first task is actually to kiss and make up with his own party.
Well, you know, that's exactly right. I think that all Republicans want to stand together now as one party and move forward, because you're better in it together than you're in it separately, right? So I think Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump all need each other. And right now, with this Donald Trump and Paul Ryan meeting, I think they're figuring out a way that they can work with each other and move forward.
Can they, though, after everything that's happened? Paul Ryan cancelling a campaign rally in his own state of Wisconsin, Mr. Trump calling him cowardly for not backing him. How are they going to actually reconcile at this point?
That's a great question. There is a difference between campaigning and a difference in governing. And now they have to govern. The campaign is over. And Paul Ryan said it in his press conference. He owes a lot of those House races to Donald Trump. And so does Mitch McConnell. And so Donald Trump also needs these Republican leaders on Capitol Hill to move his agenda. Like I said, they're all in this together, or else they're all going to hang separately.
Well, we've got some pictures of the two of them together that we're playing at the moment. What can you tell anything from the body language at all as to how they might be getting on?
Well, you know, I mean, I think this is on the speaker's balcony of Paul Ryan's office that overlooks the Washington Mall. And he's pointing out at various landmarks of where things will be at. And he's probably talking about where Donald Trump will be speaking when he gives his inaugural address, and exactly where that will be. And you can tell by the way Paul Ryan's moving his arms that that's probably the case. And Donald Trump is most probably really interested in how the city's laid out here.
Yeah, because you forget that there's actually quite a lot of nuts and bolts to get through over the next couple of months before they start tackling policy.
There sure
but
is.
I guess the big question is, how much can Mr. Trump actually achieve, even though he's got the backing, one assumes, of the Senate and the House? Can he build his wall?
Well, you know what? He has significant numbers in the House, so he'll be able to pass legislation there. It's in the Senate where you'll need 60 votes to pass most things. It'll take 50 according to arcane rules known as reconciliation, but those are really serious details. I think he has the mechanics necessary to pass a number of things that he wants to get done.
Well, as you just said, there is a big difference between the campaign and actually governing. Do you think that he's going to be able to do the things that he said he would, like repeal Obamacare?
Look, I think that they'll have to pick 2 or 3 priorities and drive those home over the next 100 days and 6 months, because they'll be judged on whether or not they're going to be able to accomplish those things. Dismantling Obamacare will be a big task. They will have to figure out what they are going to replace it with. Now, there are some ideas out there. They're going to have to do that quickly and thoroughly. They're also talking about things like comprehensive tax reform, infrastructure investments. All these things are going to need to be paid for and figured out.
A lot of figuring out, you're right. Ron Bonjean, thank you very much indeed for joining me. And if you want more on the US election, do go to the BBC News website. There's full background and analysis, including a look at who might take the top jobs in a Trump administration. It's all there at bbc.com/news, and you can also download the app. OK, let's take a look at some of the other day's news now. And the advance of Iraqi forces into Mosul has slowed in the face of waves of attacks by so-called Islamic State, which has a foothold in the east of the city. A colonel with an armoured division has told Reuters news agency the situation is becoming a nightmare for soldiers facing sudden sniper and suicide attacks from IS using a network of tunnels. The United Nations says that the last food rations it's been able to deliver to rebel-held eastern Aleppo are now being distributed. The humanitarian coordinator, Jan Egeland, says there will be nothing to hand out next week unless the UN can resupply. Mr. Egeland said the UN had provided a detailed plan for providing aid to eastern Aleppo, but that constant preconditions made it almost impossible to deliver. The global police cooperation agency Interpol has elected a Chinese public security official to be its new president, the first Chinese citizen to hold the post. His position could boost China's efforts to track down corruption suspects who have fled overseas. Amnesty International, though, is concerned that China will use the role to pursue political dissidents. An investigation into whether actor Brad Pitt was abusive towards his son in September has ended with no findings of wrongdoing, according to US media reports. Social workers in Los Angeles had been examining claims Mr. Pitt hit his 15-year-old son Maddox on a private jet in September. His wife Angelina Jolie filed for divorce the next day. Long queues have formed outside banks in India after the government scrapped the 500 and 1,000 rupee banknotes. It says it's replacing the notes as part of a crackdown on tax avoidance and fraud. But it's causing hardship for many people who depend on the cash economy for their living. As our correspondent Yogita Lamai now reports from Delhi.
Tempers are beginning to flare. These people have already been in queue for more than 3 hours now. Carrying currency notes, the government suddenly banned on Tuesday night. They've come to the bank to exchange them. A lucky few have got inside. Bipin Parekh is desperate to withdraw some money.
It's my grandson's birthday today and I want to buy him something. But I had no valid currency notes, so I had to come here to get some.
People have been given 50 days until the 30th of December this year to exchange or deposit their old currency notes. But there are also limits set on how much cash they can withdraw or exchange, at least over the next few weeks. It's a move aimed at cracking down on illegal cash holdings and fake currency notes, but it's caught people off guard. Some banks have run out of new currency notes already. That's added to the chaos. And while the execution is being criticized, the plan itself seems to have found support.
Move is good, but difficulty for people, it's less time is given.
The benefits what we are going to get from this thing what Mr. Modi has done, like the black money and stuff like that. So I don't mind waiting in line or whatever. Eventually that's my money, that is what he's going to save.
Let us join this festival of integrity and credibility.
In his address to the nation on Tuesday, Prime Minister Modi called it a grand sacrifice for the country.
Let us fight corruption and black money. Let us ensure that the nation's wealth benefits the poor.
It's the boldest crackdown this country has seen on unaccounted for cash. And it's never been as hard for anyone who's trying to evade tax. Yogita Lamai, BBC News, Mumbai.
Well, let's go back to our main story, which is, of course, Donald Trump. And he's made no secret of his America First stance on trade. So what could his presidency mean for trade deals across the globe? Here's Kristen Fraser.
In his first speech as the president-elect, Donald Trump said yesterday that the United States is going to have some really special relationships with countries around the world. But clearly there is something in the trade deals that the United States has that irritates him and irritates millions of workers who voted for him. So let's take a look at some of the things he identified during his campaign. He said a third of US manufacturing jobs have been lost since 1994, when the United States signed the NAFTA deal with Canada and Mexico. 50,000 factories have closed, he said, since China joined the World Trade Organization. And he pointed to America's yawning trade deficit in goods, currently at $800 billion, half of which he blames on China. Now, within his campaign literature, there was a 7-point plan on trade. I won't list all the things that are in that, but there are some of the key points. So obviously, he's going to take a really close look at the one trade deal that is on the table called TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It involves 12 countries, Japan, Australia, Singapore, New Zealand, among others, and it still has to be ratified. He's probably going to take another look again at NAFTA, this trade deal signed between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And if I don't like what I see, he says, then we're going to pull out of it. And of course, there's going to be a huge focus on their relationship with China. They're going to look at currency manipulation, on subsidies for Chinese manufacturers, and they'll probably take a look at the tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the United States. So what does all this mean for the UK government, who of course themselves are looking to forge new trading relationships with the outside world? Well, Barack Obama said ahead of the Brexit vote that Britain would go to the back of the queue for trade deals. But of course, Donald Trump's different. He has businesses here in the UK. He has a different relationship with the UK. You'd certainly not be at the back of the queue. That's what I can tell you, he said back in May. And that really matters to the UK government because currently, the United States is Britain's biggest external trading partner. It's worth around £40 billion. We trade fancy cars to America, crude oil and gas turbines, among a lot more. So who are the two people that are going to be leading some of these trade negotiations? Well, here are two people currently in the frame. This over here is Stephen Mnuchin. He was the finance director of the Trump campaign. He's former Goldman Sachs. They're talking about him as a possible Treasury Secretary. And over here, we have Wilbur Ross, who is a billionaire backer, or was, of the Trump campaign, and also is a bankruptcy expert. So a man who knows quite a bit about the ailing US economy. He could well be the next Trade Secretary.
Christian Fraser there with a look at some of the faces we're going to be watching out for. Well, as we've been hearing, US President-elect Donald Trump has said it was a great honour to meet President Obama for transition talks at the White House. The two men, who've been harshly critical of each other for years, were meeting for the first time. We've been looking at how their new cordial approach compares to what the pair have said about each other in the past.
The opportunity to have an excellent conversation with President-elect Trump. It was wide-ranging.
Donald Trump is uniquely unqualified to be president. He is temperamentally unfit to be commander-in-chief.
We talked about some of the organizational issues in setting up a White House. We talked about foreign policy. We talked about domestic policy.
The rise of ISIS is the direct result of policy decisions made by President Obama.
No, I'm serious. This is a guy who tweets. They should cancel Saturday Night Live.
Well, thank you very much, President Obama. This was a meeting that was going to last for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and we were just going to get to know each other. We had never met each other. I have great respect.
They're giving this guy a free pass. I really don't know what's going on. I don't know why he can't get a birth certificate.
Tonight, for the first time, I am releasing my official birth video.
A lot of the so-called birthers, these are great people.
I very much look forward to dealing with the president in the future, including counsel.
I believe that it is important for all of us, regardless of party and regardless of political preferences, to now come together.
I call President Obama and Hillary Clinton the founders of ISIS. They're the founders.
If whenever things are going badly for you and you lose, you start blaming somebody else, then you don't have what it takes to be in this job.
Mr. President, it was a great honor being with you, and I look forward to being with you many, many more times in the future. Thank you, sir.
Oh, how things change. A reminder of our main news now. And President-elect Donald Trump has visited the White House, meeting President Obama in their first encounter since the outcome of the presidential contest. Mr. Trump said it was a great honour to meet President Barack Obama for transition talks, and Mr. Obama said he was encouraged by their excellent and wide-ranging conversation. So that is it for now. I'm Jane O'Brien. Thank you very much for watching, and do tune in again.